August 1975, Kampala, Uganda. While Nigerian head of state Yakubu Gowon stood before African leaders, smiling, shaking hands, discussing the future of the continent. Back home in Lagos, soldiers were already moving. Radio stations were being seized, government buildings surrounded. His own officers, men he had trusted for years, were drafting his removal. And Gowon had no idea he would board a plane as Nigeria's leader and land as a former one. This is the story of how power was stolen in a single afternoon from a man who wasn't even in the country. For 9 years, Yakubu Gowon had ruled Nigeria. He had survived a civil war, led the country through its bloodiest chapter, reunited a fractured nation. He was young, charismatic, and seemed untouchable. But on July 29, 1975, everything changed. While attending an Organization of African Unity summit in Uganda, Gowon was overthrown in a bloodless coup. No gunfire, no chaos, just a quiet, calculated takeover. When he heard the news, he was thousands of miles away, powerless to stop it. This is not just a story about a coup, it's a story about power, ambition, broken promises, and the thin line between loyalty and betrayal. Because in Nigeria's military government, trust was a luxury no one could afford. To understand how Gowon fell, you have to understand how he rose. In 1966, Nigeria was bleeding. 2 coups in 6 months. Ethnic tensions exploding. The country on the edge of collapse. Into this chaos stepped a 31-year-old officer, Yakubu Gowon. He was calm, he was neutral, he wasn't deeply involved in the political scheming. That made him acceptable to everyone, so he became head of state almost by accident. Then came the nightmare, the Nigerian Civil War. From 1967 to 1970, the nation tore itself apart. Biafra declared independence. Millions died from starvation and fighting. Gowon held the country together, but just barely. When the war ended in 1970, he promised to heal the wounds. No victor, no vanquished, he said. Reconciliation, not revenge. Nigerians loved him, he was a hero, but being a hero doesn't keep you in power. Gowon made a promise. In 1970, he said he would hand over power to a civilian government by 1976. The country believed him. They waited. But then, in October 1974, Gowon made a fatal mistake. He postponed the transition indefinitely. He said Nigeria wasn't ready, that the country needed more time, that democracy would have to wait. The people felt betrayed. The military felt restless. And behind closed doors, officers began to whisper. Gowon was becoming too comfortable, too distant. He was surrounded by advisors who shielded him from reality. Corruption was spreading. The economy was struggling despite oil wealth. And worst of all, he had broken his word. The soldiers who once supported him now saw him as an obstacle. July 1975. Gowon prepared to leave Nigeria for an OAU summit in Kampala, Uganda. It was meant to be routine, a chance to represent Nigeria on the African stage, a moment of diplomacy and prestige. But while he packed his bags, a plan was already in motion. 3 key officers were leading it: Brigadier Murtala Mohammed, Brigadier Olusegun Obasanjo, and Brigadier Theophilus Danjuma. These weren't rebels, they were insiders, men Gowon trusted, men who had fought beside him. But trust in a military government is always temporary. July 29, 1975. Gowon was in Uganda attending meetings, delivering speeches. He was calm, confident, unaware. Back in Nigeria, the coup began at midday. There were no gunshots, no violence, just swift, silent coordination. Soldiers quietly took over the radio station in Lagos. Key government buildings were secured, phone lines to the presidential villa were cut. By early afternoon, it was done. Brigadier Murtala Mohammed walked into the radio station. He held a speech in his hand. The coup plotters had spent days writing it, revising it, perfecting it. At exactly 6 p.m., his voice crackled across every radio in Nigeria. "Fellow Nigerians," he began, "I bring you news of great importance." The country froze. The government of General Yakubu Gowon has been removed from office. Imagine that moment. Millions of Nigerians gathered around radios, stunned into silence. Gowon, sitting in a hotel room in Kampala, hearing his name on the BBC. His aides rushing in, confused, panicking, phone calls that wouldn't connect, allies who wouldn't answer. He had been overthrown, and he hadn't even known it was coming. Murtala Mohammed's broadcast was brutal in its honesty. He accused Gowon of failing to transition to civilian rule, of tolerating corruption, of losing touch with the Nigerian people, of surrounding himself with sycophants. He listed promise after broken promise, policy after failed policy, and then the final blow. General Gowon is no longer head of state. No trial, no negotiation, just a fact delivered coldly over the airwaves. Gowon tried to respond. He issued statements. He insisted he was still in charge. He demanded loyalty. But loyalty requires presence. And he was 5,000 miles away. None of his commanders obeyed him. Not one. Within hours it was clear the coup had succeeded. Gowon would never return to Nigeria as head of state. Gowon didn't return home. He couldn't. He was told quietly that his safety couldn't be guaranteed, that coming back would be dangerous, that it was over. So he stayed away, first in Uganda, then in Togo, and finally in exile in London. He enrolled at the University of Warwick, studied political science, lived quietly, far from the power he once held. Murtala Mohammed became Nigeria's new leader. He moved fast, purged corruption, restructured the military, set a new transition date for civilian rule. The public loved him. He was everything Gowon had stopped being: decisive, bold, uncorrupted. For a moment, Nigeria believed again. But military power is a violent thing. In 1976, Murtala himself was assassinated in a failed coup attempt. The cycle continued. Gowon's removal changed Nigeria forever. It set a precedent. No leader, no matter how powerful, was safe. Loyalty in the military was conditional. Promises meant nothing without results. It also proved that coups didn't need violence to succeed. They just needed coordination, timing, and the right excuse. For decades, Nigeria would struggle with military rule. Coup after coup, leader after leader. Democracy delayed again and again. Gowon's broken promise of 1974 became a symbol, a warning, a lesson in what happens when leaders forget the people who put them in power. Even today, Nigerians remember July 29, 1975, not with anger but with reflection, because it showed that power is never truly yours, you're only borrowing it. Yakubu Gowon eventually returned to Nigeria in the 1980s. He was forgiven, welcomed back, respected as an elder statesman. But he never ruled again. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Power doesn't wait for you, and if you're not careful, it disappears while you're looking the other way. On a quiet morning in Kampala, Gowon woke up as a leader. By evening, he was just a man, and Nigeria moved on without him.